Let me introduce Paul Alistair Collins, to give you your full name. An award-winning professional wildlife photographer, filmmaker, and tour guide. So, not much expertise there, really. This is his second time here, and if anybody was here for the last time when it was Svalbard and Lake Kerkini, you know you're in for a real treat. Photographs were just absolutely stunning. And having had a look at your website today, I can see that I couldn't stop watching the diver, by the way. There's a little video on his website about it showing a diver coming up onto its nest. And it's mesmerising. I can thoroughly recommend it. But tonight, we're going to be a little further away. We're going to be talking about the spectacular wildlife we found just outside Panama City, so in Central America. And I meant to ask you before we started how you say the name of the national park.
Soberania.
Thank you. Where there's a mere 970 species of bird being recorded. Plus, obviously, a great variety of wildlife. So I know we're in for a treat. So I'll pass you over to Paul, and I apologise in advance for the slight interruption at 8. But let's get going. Turn the lights on.
Great. Sorry, so which camera is the zoom on? Is it black or white one?
It's on that one.
Right, well, I hope you can see my face. If not, yeah, the faces are more important. So thanks for coming tonight. So yeah, I was speaking about Svalbard and the tours that I run there back in, I think, February or March. And this one's about one of my other favorite new photo locations, Panama. I'm going to be looking down my laptop a little bit just to do these slides, but also this is actually a new version of a talk I've been doing, basically based on the trip that I did back in September at the end of the rainy season. So all the photos, pretty much all the photos you'll see tonight are fresh from a couple of months ago, taken in a 5-day trip. So it just shows you the breadth of species that you can see. So why particularly Panama? Why Panama on Google Maps? I don't know. I'm not sure why that's on there. But why Panama? So it's bird perspective. It's really fascinating. It's right in the middle between North and South America, that kind of umbilical cord that connects with 2 continents, and it's a really key migration route. So in April, May, and then in September, October, at the end of the rainy season, so either end of the rainy season, you get huge migrations of like American warblers and birds of prey, incredible kind of kettles of vultures and hawks, and literally millions and millions of these birds of prey flying over. September, October being a fantastic peak time to see these birds as they're passing through. A very rich variety, actually, even just within Panama City itself. When you touch down, it's kind of quite mesmerizing. You see kind of, you know, ibis and herons and all sorts of colorful birds as you touch down into Panama City. And mountains of the Soberania National Park, just about 20-minute drive outside of Panama City. So it's a very rich, there's a lot of kind of biodiversity on its doorstep. My first ever trip to Panama was back in 2018. So as I said, as Sue said, I'm a TV producer as well. And back in the early days when I was working in TV, I was doing a lot of reality TV shows, so completely different kind of wildlife, doing a kind of Love Island and those kind of shows. So this was one of the locations we were filming on. And it was a wonderful job. And I'd never been to Latin America at that point. But it was also, from a bird watching point of view, not very inspiring, because I was sitting in a little gallery, kind of tin box, like TV gallery, with kind of cameras scattered around the location. And I was in this tin box from 4 o'clock in the morning till 4 in the afternoon, and get back and the sun would set. So obviously no bird watching opportunities in here, but we had wonderful cameras that could zoom in on the beach when I got in at sunrise. I was going to do bird watching from the TV gallery. There's a toucan in there as well. Obviously not seeing any of these birds in the flesh, picking up little birds. But on the rare day off that I had away from the TV job, there was a local vet just down the road from my hotel who would take me out on birding excursions, and we went kayaking and exploring the rainforest. And inevitably, obviously, the days that I had off, it was torrential rain, and we saw very few birds. But it was my first proper experience of birds. And in that particular BOC archipelago, which is just south of Costa Rica, you get lots of interesting endemic birds. So I was kind of ticking off birds and also getting my camera out of my bag and photographing these endemic Passerini's tanagers and kind of doing the photographic styles that I very much love, doing kind of very soft foliage windows. And but a lot of the time it was kind of mere glimpses of birds in the foliage, and quite a very fun and exotic but quite frustrating experience photographically. Back then, I didn't have any time in Panama City. It was very much just going to the archipelago, flying in and out of Panama City, dashing off. But something had clocked my radar. Prior to the trip, I barely even knew where Panama was. So it's quite an eye-opening trip, that first one. But something in Panama City just outside had kind of clocked my radar and kind of kept returning year after year. And it's this place here, a former kind of US military radar tower. And now it's running as an eco lodge. But I'd heard quite a few interesting things about it, and I've worked on various TV shows since about abandoned buildings or buildings kind of taken over by nature, and this kind of kept popping up on my radar as an interesting location to check out. And then eventually, as I started expanding photo tours, I kind of kept coming back to it. The guy who found this location is called Raul Ares de Para, and he's a kind of local guy who worked for the government, and then he found this tower basically planning to make an eco lodge out in the forest. And he was searching for years and years, looking for the perfect destination for to run his own birding holidays and have a kind of B&B experience. And he came across this strange hidden structure and basically decided it was absolutely perfect, because you've got this long road leading up to the lodge. It's the only building in the entire area, just a strange kind of foreboding structure, and you've got parrots and monkeys. You described, loads of animals just scurrying up this kind of wild road covered in kind of brambles, and they had to clear all these paths in the jungle, and there were animals everywhere. But the true thing, glory that he found when he got up to this tower is obviously you get up on the roof, and it's that building there. It's the only building in the entire rainforest, and it sounds a bit odd saying that he kind of stumbled upon it, but the thing is, unless you're up there, you don't actually see. This is obviously a drone shot here. You don't see the building unless you're literally walking, cutting down vegetation, and then you literally just kind of stumbled upon it. And it's like, oh my gosh. So he got up on the roof, and the views that you get are absolutely formidable. And with a lot of work and a lot of resistance initially, he finally managed to kind of restore the building, doing very little kind of structural work, and ended up just making little tinkers here and there to adding accommodation, a kitchen, restaurant, and comfy accommodation. And now it's probably one of the leading kind of eco lodges in that area, and affording absolutely mesmerizing views out over the rainforest, and a fantastic kind of experience that you can't really get, I think, in many other places. I think most people's experience of the rainforest when they go, it's at this kind of level. So the kind of very kind of understory level, walking along, and it's very damp and sticky, and you're often craning your neck up at trees, looking for birds, often kind of flitting around in the darkness. It's a challenging experience birding, and although there's a kind of plethora of birds, over 900 species, it's quite hard to kind of get your eye in. It's quite overwhelming, and it's quite itchy, and there's lots of mosquitoes. And the interesting thing about this location, I find, is that you're obviously up in the treetops, up above everything. And it's a place where you can really experience all the different levels of the rainforest rather than just one. So the tower itself, it's located on the banks of the Panama Canal. These are some drone shots that I got on the first couple of days that I was out there. I think the video, oh, there we go. And it was created, so just a bit of a history, it was kind of created during the 1950s in the wake of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and then it was abandoned in the 1990s after the Cold War, and basically sat abandoned for about 10, 15 years until Raoul found it. And now it's basically this eco lodge. But a lot of species that weren't really in that area have started to make their home in the gardens, in the very small gardens and the treetops around there. So a whole range of species that you'd really struggle to find elsewhere in Panama or near the city. And these are the views from the roof that you get there. So it's a kind of, there's no radar anymore in this tower, but there's a kind of geometric dome, that big yellow dome that you see on top of the building. and 360-degree views out over that rainforest. So wonderful views up in the early morning. You get these incredible mists, shrouding the rainforests. And also in some directions at sunrise, you can look out towards the distant skyscrapers of Panama City. So it's a very unusual blend of urban and nature out there. And here up on the roof, you get this kind of hollowed out radar dome. This dome is very much in the is painted this way. It's the bill of the bill colors of the keel-bill toucan, which is kind of one of the iconic species that you get up there, and obviously one of the kind of iconic species of the rainforest. It's a wonderful place to see. What I particularly like about the Canopy Tower and being up there is that you get a very sweeping, holistic overview of the species, and rather than starting right down on the forest floor level, where it's very dark and hot and humid, and you're really struggling to get glimpses up here, you get a very sweeping overview, and you get to get your eye in with some of the kind of iconic rainforest species like the parrots and the toucans, these characters, and you get pretty much unobstructed views as well up here. So for photography, absolutely wonderful, because you get these views without any branches, or if you get foliage, then it can create quite nice windows. You get the collared aracari, which is a kind of smaller cousin of the keel-bill toucans, very often seen in flocks, just kind of hopping from tree to tree, picking off seeds. Lots of tanagers, so instead of the kind of finches and tits that we get over here, you get a lot of tanagers, so probably about 12 or so different species that you get up there. Very colourful birds, and again, you can see this at the lower levels and also around like garden bird feeders, but they're quite where you've got the gloom, the shadows, they really do surprisingly blend in quite well to the shadows. So up here in kind of stark sunlight, obviously the top of the canopy, the emergent layer of the forest, they're much easier to see. Blue Dacnus being one of the kind of smaller tanager species, pretty much only found in the kind of emergent top layer of the forest. So we're about 200 feet up above the forest here. Wonderful, colourful species. So orioles, very elusive, obviously when we get them in Europe, or rarely in the UK. And again, surprisingly, pretty well camouflaged in the lower layers of the forest where you get dappled light. But up here, the orioles really pop out. And then thick-billed euphonias, so basically they're kind of equivalent of the finches. Lots of very colourful blue and yellow birds, which up here pop out very strongly against soft green backgrounds. And this is kind of the, I suppose, the holy grail bird for an experience at the Canopy Tower, the blue cotinga. A bird, if you know the umbrella birds and the bell birds, slightly unusual bird. It's got a bright kind of violet breast, and very tricky to see as soon as it dips down into the trees. But here it perches quite prominently, sometimes cooling in the early hours of the morning. Of course, at canopy height as well, you get wonderful flybys from all sorts of birds. The various different pigeon species, speckled pigeon here, or macaws or toucans going from their night roosts, passing by. Also, of course, the birds on migration. You get a lot of raptors flying at eye level. But it's not just birds, of course. You get for the kind of mammal fans in the room. I mean, sloths are probably the kind of key mammal species that most mammal hunters want to look for, and they're very reliable up there, always kind of sitting in one place for about 20 hours a day, sleeping, rarely moving, but really kind of in their own way quite fascinating animals, full of a lot of texture, and they've got this very coarse fur with algae and moss kind of growing on them. They move so slowly that they have these little micro ecosystems within their fur, and lots of moth species, one or two species even unique, particularly to sloths. So they are kind of habitat in their own right in the treetops. But wonderful to get them among the kind of fig and Cecropia trees. And then iguanas as well, often sometimes down on the ground, but these ones are more kind of tree-dwelling green iguanas. And also lots of monkeys, Jeffrins tamarin. So Raoul, the founder of the Canopy Lodge, described getting up on the roof and immediately seeing tamarins scampering around. And as you see here, they are very approachable, often kind of scampering around on the roof. But actually offering really interesting kind of a different perspective. So again, you can shoot at eye level or shoot up or look down, and looking directly down on the tamarins, with really interesting kind of shooting against the dark forest floor with no light kind of penetrating the floor. You get quite interesting kind of top-down perspectives of the tamarins and their family life, and are able to kind of pick up on different textures and shapes. Similarly with the sloths, real joy photographically as they wake up to get them against the kind of darker patches of the forest, and work on kind of studio style portraiture as they kind of scratch their limbs. Of course, one kind of really wonderful thing of being up there in the sunrise, particularly during the rainy season, is that you get these thick mists kind of rolling over the treetops. So with that, you get these white skies, which at ground level are very glary. And if you're looking up at a bird in the treetops against a white sky, then you're going to get a very unpleasant, kind of milky, glary photo. At eye level, though, you get very pleasing, soft, kind of soft box lighting, very soft views, and of course it kind of softens and picks up on the bold colors of the birds. Whereas if you have bright sunshine, then you get a lot of very washed out colors. So getting these big open shots and the toucans framed against the white sky is lovely. And the araucaries poking their heads up above the trees. As a kind of comparison, a bit more of a kind of impressionist eye level view looking through the foliage. Of course, when you're at ground level, and we can't work our way through the different layers of the forest in this talk, but this is kind of a view that you have to fight with in the lower levels where there's constant foliage thickets and you've got a lot less light. Up here, it's kind of getting these open shots, but then actually using the thicket of foliage to our advantage greatly and having these lovely kind of soft windows of foliage leading in. Similarly, at eye level, shooting through palm fronds, getting the parakeets and various parrots. They're all kind of waking up from their morning roosts, perched in the trees and kind of playing around with color palettes a lot. But then a different view against the white sky, a bit more abstract and open. And actually, even with distant parakeets, it's quite interesting getting them within the kind of larger frame. If anyone came to my Svalbard talk or my Kerkini talk, I talk a lot about, I have a kind of photographic method that I do with any photo trip, whether I know a location really, really well or something's completely new, which is a kind of 20-60-20 approach of, I spend kind of 20% of my time kind of just looking for opportunities and letting myself be overwhelmed by creative possibilities and by the various subjects and kind of, you know, some of these birds are very familiar to me now, but there's some like the Zucatinga, which is a completely new species for me. And there's a kind of initial overwhelm of, oh gosh, I must photograph that and have a kind of shot, say that I've seen it. But also kind of, I think as photographers, letting ourselves, and if I don't know how many photographers are in the room tonight, but kind of letting ourselves make mistakes or forget to take the lens cap off or kind of just enjoy the moment, enjoy the experience, and then kind of having a 60% of my time teasing more interesting shots, more interesting angles. And then there's that kind of 20% at the end, which is a bit more of an elusive, you know, cherry on top, maybe a award-winning shot or a shot that sticks in the memory. And of course, getting any kind of shot in the rainforest, you know, down at ground level is very tricky, as you'll see later. But up here is a wonderful kind of holistic overview of the, you know, you get every kind of story of the rainforest laid out in front of you. And you get to kind of tease those opportunities with very vibrant common species and work these different angles. So again, playing around with different backdrops and getting the sloth on the one hand against kind of dark forest floor backdrops, on the other hand, interesting behaviors emphasized against clear white sky. And with a 360-degree view around the roof of the tower, you get to know certain perches and what birds land on such perches, and you get to know the habits of particular individuals that like to sing on a perch at, say, 7 o'clock in the morning. These tropical kingbirds like to sit there quite prominently. So kind of thinking a bit more street photographer-wise, thinking about kind of having a bit of a composition leading out and a nice winding branch, and then just waiting for the birds to arrive. Adds 3 letters to the kingbird, and you get the mock kingbird using the same perch. I've adjusted my camera settings a tiny bit there, so this is a little bit soft, and I've opened up the aperture a bit more just to make it a lot more in focus across the shot. But getting to know the different perches and the different behaviors is just, it lets the overwhelm of the rainforest be a bit more gentle than, say, just thrusting yourself deep into the rainforest, where everything is just kind of overwhelming and you don't know where to point. It kind of takes off some of the kind of edge of frustration, gently easing in and soaking up this environment. Wonderful black-cheeked woodpeckers. Woodpeckers, one of my favorite species, clambering up the treetops. Great to be eye level with them. But again, kind of early morning, you get the sun right on them, so just standard kind of front light. And then in the evening, you get more kind of silhouetted shots. So just an interesting place to play around with different techniques, different angles. And the canopy tower structure itself hosted various birds, so like yellow-headed caracaras here on migration, and getting them on certain parts of the buildings or the outbuildings framed among the foliage. And this is very much the kind of shots I like doing with foliage, kind of teasing the environment and acting as a frame if I have a small bird in the frame. And tropical kingbirds, kind of flycatcher-like birds, slightly larger and bulkier, perching on the balcony. And the tower, with its yellows and blues, afford quite abstract compositions with the house wrens and various other birds and tanagers singing from them. I'm very keen, those about my Svalbard talk, I love absolutely very minimalist kind of compositions and quite abstract, and just kind of playing around with lots of different ideas as I embrace all the different bird life up there. Some birds, of course, look much better when they do fill the entire frame. Here's a little hummingbird taking a rest, but getting in close with a big lens obviously starts to reveal a lot of the details. Some of these hummingbirds come so close, I've actually got a very short kind of close-up macro lens that I use for like flower and butterfly photography, and just picking up on some of the very fine details of the iridescence. And there's about maybe 12 or so different species of hummingbird that you get at this time of year, so this being mid-September. This is one of the smallest ones, the blue-chested. You've just got a little hint of the blue still after the breeding season. Again, photographed against the forest floor with a little bit of a kind of soft flash just to the sides, just to pick up on some of the iridescence. These, interestingly, are all feeding around the upper levels, so they do visit the bird feeders, like the sugar feeders, as you'll see in this little clip. But actually, a lot of them are feeding at the very high levels, so about 200 feet up on any kind of nectaring plants high up. So the ones that you see here, there's a white-necked jacobin just hovering, kind of flashing its very large, broad white tail there. Yeah, wonderful variety of different hummingbirds. I tend to like using kind of natural sunlight and figuring out what their perches are to get the best light coming from a little bit from behind, which makes them a bit more iridescent. One of the smallest hummingbirds here, the snowy bellies, pretty much passing through on migration. And one of the, by contrast, one of the larger hummingbirds, the long-billed hermit. Here, you do see with natural light, even at the canopy level where light is, well, sorry, in the emergent layer of the forest at 200 feet up, light is still a bit of a struggle with these birds because their wing beat is about 200 beats a second. So incredibly fast flying. So using just the camera, natural light, no flash, you do start to get a little bit of a losing focus on these birds. So this is where I do use flash with a little extender on my flash just to catch these very, very high speed moments. But when it rains, it's nice to just go natural and get a little bit more movement and catch a little bit of the detail of the rain. And here the white-necked jacobins resting out of the rain. Probably one of my favorite hummingbirds as they hover with their big white tails, beautifully found. And here they pick their kind of favorite perches high up in the treetops. I'm often working my angle with that kind of 360 degrees. You can really go at all sorts of angles, whereas on the ground level in the rainforest, you're often really fighting, struggling to get a clear view. And by the time you have a clear view, if you do, then a bird is flitted off. Here, they're much more obviously exposed. So you really get a wonderful chance to really play around with different angles and get slightly more kind of atmospheric shots of these little birds and something a bit more outside the box. Here you can just see the kind of faint outline of one of the orchids that it's been feeding on. And of course, just playing around slightly more mustard kind of shots, like or hate them, but playing around with focus, getting them kind of encircled in little areas of light. But I use this time, these kind of initial kind of 24 hours at the canopy tower, just to play around with ideas and let my imagination just kind of embrace it all and kind of go into wild overdrive and kind of think like a child and just think there's no mistakes here, just play around with different ideas. And then I take those ideas when we eventually do go down into the next layers of the forest. So this is one layer below, and the layer which is probably more familiar to a lot of people, the kind of canopy level, because this is where we see the majority of bird life, monkeys, frogs, a real kind of a rich variety of species live up in the canopy. This is obviously directly just below the crown of where we've been in the emergent layer, but this is where most species tend to nest, feed. But obviously from a ground perspective, as a bird watcher or photographer, this is a kind of tricky bit where we're ground level looking up at the canopy, and we've got a lot of different things to contend with, a lot of challenges. But it's a matter of kind of embracing those challenges from a bird watching or photography perspective, kind of translating them into positives. You get this is a real joy to look for the great patoo, but obviously if you're sweaty and riddled with insect bites, it's a bit of a challenge. But I think from ground level, when you get these patoos, they're kind of like a little nightjar or owl, and they're incredibly camouflaged. And sometimes you're really straining for a glimpse through the treetops, and this is about as good as you can do. Of course, again, on the roof of the canopy tower, you're suddenly eye level, and you've got much more open views of this common patoo, and you've got no vegetation that you're struggling with. Things like the dot-winged ant wrens. So again, at that level, you're really, really peering for shots, and these are very, very flighty birds, and anything is kind of a grab shot when you're really peering up the canopy. And then, of course, oh yeah.
But we just past 8, unless Elaine told me another 10 people, 9 or 10 people have joined, and then we won't be holding the AGM. Okay, so sorry to interrupt, but that we'll be postponing the AGM for at least 2 weeks. As we now got a different format for the evening, would you like to take a break at a convenient point about getting on for 8:30? Yeah, that'd be fine.
Yeah.
Or 20 past 8:30.
Yeah, no, sure. Cool. Okay.
Sorry.
So these are some of the kind of challenges when you get down there, but I like to try to think, as you'll see in a minute, how to kind of shift those challenges into creative positives. So at the moment here, obviously back on the roof, you suddenly get clear open views of these patoos, and you're kind of thinking, well, why am I at ground level? I should be up on the roof. Again, these very flighty birds, often very skulking, very fleeting, and then you're fighting with light as well. So even with very colourful species like these jays, these black-crested jays, which are yellow and blue, as soon as you're down in the shadows or pointing up, like you can see, there's all this camera shake, and the colours don't really pop. And when you do get something in a pool of light, the light is not quite as flattering, and you get much more glary skies than you would at the eye level. So arguably, obviously, when you're up in the treetops, you might think, well, why bother descending into ground level after you've had that incredible kind of initiation up on the roof? But I guess obviously this talk is called Rainforest Stories, literally, because every story of the rainforest, as in building story, has its own story, and they all interconnect. They're all independent, but you get lots of species interweaving between the different stories of the rainforest. And I think a lot of people come and experience just kind of one level, often the ground level, peering up, craning their neck, hurting their back. But actually experiencing all 4 stories of the rainforest, as you'll see, they all have their different riches and they're all different challenges. And toucans here, obviously out in the open, wonderful open setting, and you get to see the behaviors and everything kind of in technicolor up above the emergent layer, 200 feet up. Actually, from the ground level looking up, you can get some quite interesting perspectives spraying among the leaves, and it's just kind of thinking how those views kind of translate from a different angle. And more mustard thing, but shooting through the dappled leaves. It's a kind of kaleidoscope experience watching things like grackles and parrots and things fly over. So sometimes I play to that and just kind of embrace the kind of the fleeting encounter, and the kind of the kaleidoscope effect of looking through the leaves at all these different birds as they fly over. But also you do get a lot of the birds in the emergent layer, so those toucans, those raptors that we saw migrating, they obviously do come down to nest or rest up in the canopy. So here, forest falcons looking for food, either in the forest floor or else just taking a little pause. And the light that touches that upper layer is just really lovely and soft and dappled. Yeah, capuchin monkeys as well, creating those little bridges. So all the canopy trees, they all kind of interconnect and mesh together, all the branches interweave. So you get these kind of natural bridges that a lot of species like the capuchin monkeys and the tree anteaters use. And of course, if you listen and look hard enough, then you start to notice all sorts of birds up there, and the strain kind of ends up easing and becomes a bit more pleasurable. And obviously an iconic sound of any forest is a woodpecker. And you get huge woodpeckers out there, such as these crimson crested woodpeckers here. Like the iconic species, the kind of toucan or parrot equivalent in this layer are the mots, amatrogans. So these being the hooping mots here. Again, you're contending with light a lot. So here I use a flash with a little extender on it, a little softbox extender on it, just to light up the bird enough. Because you find that if you don't use the flash in these circumstances, then very colourful species like the rufous mot just actually look quite gloomy. So they always just need that extra little kick. These, fortunately, are birds that pose out very much in the open and very static, often just feeding, often kind of hawking for insects or looking for berries. So they're very kind of prominently perched. So very easy to kind of get framed without any branch in front of them. And they're pretty static. Again, flash used for the cinnamon woodpeckers. Flash has a danger of kind of bouncing off foliage or bouncing off birds in a way that makes them not look particularly alive. So it's always a bit of a problem making sure that the birds aren't kind of looking too static, making sure there's kind of catch light in the eye to give life to them. So I always prefer using natural light as much as possible for these situations. On the trogons, the kind of toucan or parrot equivalent of this habitat, you often get these hawking for insects or even lizards, snakes, crickets, that kind of thing. You get 5 different species. This is around the Pipeline Road, which is one of the kind of best birding locations in Panama. And you can actually see up to 380 species in a single day on this Pipeline Road, including these 5 or 6 species of trogon, which are kind of the crown jewel of this canopy layer. Cloud trogons here, very prominently perched, often with their backs to us, but when they're facing, they've got this lovely red, which really pops out of the green foliage. And in this instance, it's nice to kind of pull back and get a bit more of a tangle of vegetation, but you do see there's just such a tangle of vegetation that it's hard to get very clear shots. But they do like their prominent perches, and they're often like flycatchers, kind of walking back and forth. So occasionally they pick a favoured spot and pose very, very beautifully. Or else kind of picking their prey, which often they follow kind of capuchin monkeys, which scare up insects and things, so make very kind of easy pickings for these very lovely trogons. One of their favourite foods are these butterflies here, the long-winged butterflies, which again, they're all flying around canopy level, feeding on orchids and nectaring flowers. And there's 1 or 2 lovely flowers that sprout up there. So with a long lens shooting up again against a glary sky, using a tripod, of course, to make sure that I get crisp shots. These are really kind of interesting butterfly species. They're very defensive over their flowers, often kind of fanning their wings around the flowers, making sure that other kind of rival butterflies don't fly in, often chasing butterflies away, just very, very protective over their flowers. Lower levels, just really nice dappled lighting. Up here, I really like embracing the different kind of the connectedness between the different layers of the rainforest. So shooting from the forest floor here, looking up at this very tall flower and looking back up at the canopy with a wide angle lens here and a little flash, you get the kind of different relationships, but a bit more of a kind of abstract perspective kind of different relationships going on in the forest. Of course, we can't really talk about a rainforest without mentioning the thing that connects all those layers so intensely, and that's the rain itself, the kind of lifeblood, the lifeblood of the forest. You get about, I think, close to 2 liters of rainfall in the rainy season, several inches per day. But usually at the end of the rainy season, you get maybe about an hour of rain, just very, very intense rain. So of course, when it does rain, I'm out there, not keeping dry at all. We really love embracing it in the kind of open areas. You get these lovely kind of marshy swamplands in the Soberania National Park with all sorts of orioles and annies and cuckoos, various birds like that. But photographing back towards the forest, out of these forest clearings, you get the rain really lovely kind of stenciled against the backdrop. In my camera, if you know about underexposing, I'm using a high shutter speed, but making the picture as dark as possible and shooting against a dark patch of woodland to make a bit more of an abstract perspective of the rain falling. And the sloth, which hasn't moved a muscle since we last saw it, just sitting out the rain as well. But when it rains, I think always embrace it, because that is the kind of heartbeat of the forest and what gives life to all these different layers. So of course, photographing it, and it creates a different mood as well when the sloth is looking a bit drenched and bedraggled, which lends itself well to the black and white situations. But down in the forest, occasionally you get these little clearings, these little streams or little swampy areas which attract all sorts of diverse life, a lot of kind of reptilian life, such as these spectacled caimans in the more kind of boggy waters. Lovely prehistoric lighting, and of course at that level where there's so little light penetrating the very bottom, you get quite kind of prehistoric, quite abstract perspectives of these things. And one of the more common kind of riverside, waterside birds, the American pygmy kingfisher. There's about 6 species of kingfisher in this particular area. This one is the hardest, the skulkiest, probably to see, often sitting right in the depths of the foliage, patiently hunting along very, very murky, muddy streams. And in more open areas, you get some wading birds, such as southern lapwing, also northern jacanas, and one of my absolute favorites to see there, the rufescent tiger herons, which are slightly unusually kind of forest dwellers. Often you see them roaming among the trees, or actually even climbing up the trees. And they've got this wonderful kind of barred plumage and camouflage. And again, I like doing a lot of the kind of black backgrounds there, or else incorporating them inside the habitat. And with the rain, you get hordes and hordes of frogs calling, this being the rain frog, of course. So thousands and thousands of these croaking throughout the day and night. Rich variety of different frogs. I think about 2,000 different species of frog that you get in this one single tract of forest. This being one of the most common ones, a really interesting species, the granular glass frog. We have peppercorn kind of spots, but actually if you shine a light through it, then you can see its harp very clearly. So it's got this kind of glassy, translucent quality to it. Rich variety of different lizards, anoles, and of course the prey of the trogon resting here. And then further down, as you get into more leafy levels, Panama's most venomous snake here, the fer de lance, lit with a couple of, there's a flash on my camera, and then another flash in the back, just giving a little bit of backlighting here. And then we travel down into the understory. So this is about 50 meters or so above the ground. So we've dropped from 200 feet up, rather, down to about 50 feet down into the forest. And here, of course, we're losing light rapidly. Only about 5% of the sunlight that hits the top actually gets down here. So plants are really kind of competing for space here. And the species that you get here are a lot more drab, a lot less colorful generally, and species are a lot more kind of reliant on camouflage here. So you get certain larger kind of broad leaf plants and large flowers basically, they're so large just to soak up as much water as they can, or as much sunlight as they can, It's a much more kind of competitive environment down there. A wonderful variety of different ferns and leaves and mosses and a few flowering plants. But as I said, the birds are a lot more plain and skulking down here, a lot less colourful than they are in the upper levels, generally by and large. You get kind of the cousins of the woodpeckers. You get these wood creepers here, the plain brown. I mean, if that's not a name, then these plain brown wood creepers climbing up the trees, very, very skulky, kind of climbing around the trees, unnoticed. Various different wood creeper species here, so the Carrow wood creeper, and also the northern barred wood creeper, which is probably one of the more ornately plumaged of the wood creepers. Probably one of the plainer birds down there, the clay-coloured thrush, which incidentally is Costa Rica's national bird because it has not for its appearance so much, but for its very beautiful fluty call, which heralds the start and the end of the rainy season. But you do get obviously, whilst you get a lot of very camouflaged species down there and very potentially visually plain bird species down there, and of course you've got a lot less light, so these birds are blending in. So it's a real challenge picking out birds down here. There are a couple of species which make up for that in their appearance and also in their fascinating behaviours. You know what? I'll ask: does anyone know what bird would be using this tree? No idea. Okay, so there's some weird branches coming off, have horizontal branches, which are the the favoured perches of these birds here, the manakins. So really interesting neotropic bird family. This one, the velvety manakin with a gorgeous bright blue head. One of the more colourful species, golden collared manakin. And these are often seen. You have to go much deeper into the forest to see these manakins. Now, they're obviously visually very pretty, lovely yellow, bright red, and you often get them in quite pronounced, prominent perches. But it's not so much their visual appeal, but more their kind of interesting behavioural appeal. Obviously, a joy to photograph them in the different light conditions, but the real one that I was targeting back in September was this one, the red-capped manakin, which has a really fascinating courtship ritual. Even in the end of a rainy season, they're still constantly courting. However, they're not actually planning on getting mates at the end of the rainy season because, of course, they breed like the birds in the UK. They breed in April, May, June. So what it's doing courting is a really interesting question. Here you get this very young male, so not actually at courting age, using one of these perches. He's just sitting there. He's got these wonderful kind of yellow trousers and bright red head. But suddenly he's sitting there quite happily, and suddenly he starts kind of vigorously shaking up and down. And the thing is, you can't quite make out what's happening with the camera. So you'll see in a couple of slides, I'll show a video of what's actually happening here. But he starts very vigorously shaking up and down and kind of flaring those yellow breeches that he's got. And then, interestingly, another one comes along, but this is actually an adult male, not a female. So he's not actually trying to impress any females or anything. He's actually trying to attract the attention of a male. And what's going on here is that he's learning to court, he's learning to dance, and he needs someone else's help. So this adult male has come along and is watching his performance and thinking is not very good. He's not doing a very good job of hopping from side to side and shaking himself. So then the adult male decides to show how you actually do it. I don't know, there might be some music that plays on this. No. Okay, this is the adult male here. He does this amazing shuffle. And then if you imagine Billie Jean, Michael Jackson, doing the moonwalk. We're really fantastic. And you sometimes get trios of them doing that dance and then hopping over each other and doing a bit of a conveyor belt. And they each have a turn basically to basically the young birds are the apprentices, and in 1 or 2 years after perfection, they'll eventually perform it, hopefully to perfection. But that for me was a real kind of Dave Ashman moment, because I'd seen that on Dave Ashman documentaries, but I hadn't seen that in the flesh. So it was a real joy. I was kind of grinning from ear to ear. It's a very interesting place just to watch. You get obviously the lek happening throughout the day, so that's the dancing that they do. The lek. It's an interesting place to put a camera trap. So I had one of these remotely triggered camera traps for picking up mammals and things, and I put it out there actually literally to see if I could get a bit more bird activity. But also that route just going under those branches was used a lot by mammals. There were lots of footprints. So I left the camera trap over a few nights of my stay and picked up a few different mammals and birds. This is one of the more common day species that you just glimpsed there, the white-nosed coati, coatimundi, a kind of raccoon-like animal. And these as well, very common mammals here, the agouti, which is now trying to destroy the lek branches. And then as the sun goes down, the camera will flip into night mode, infrared mode. And there's this great tinamou, a kind of pheasant-like bird, which we only heard, very seldom heard, from the canopy tower roof in the early morning, but never actually saw them. So suddenly they come out in the late hours, very skulking. And of course, I'm not here. This is all remotely captured. And then shyer mammals, nocturnal mammals such as the armadillos, all creatures that associate with the darkest corners of the forest. And then the real kind of crown jewel moment was when an ocelot cat came out and came right up to the camera. There's obviously at night time that the jungle kind of starts to reveal all these much more elusive species. And then going down, so this is drone again that I captured on my last trip, going down into the forest, you get to the very bottom final layer of the jungle, or the rainforest, which is of course the forest floor, which is the darkest, dampest place, full of kind of leaves and mushrooms and decomposition, lots of carcasses and things decomposing down there, lots of insects. The majority of insects are down there, and you've seen the various mammals like the Central American agouti, the largest of the rodents in that area, one of the very common ones, and a lot of very skulking species. So if you thought the upper level birds were skulking, these ones are a lot more kind of creeping away, very mouse-like. But interestingly, down here, even though it's so far from the emergent layer of the forest, you get these emergent layer and canopy species coming down. So the tannage is actually coming down here. And you'd wonder why, when there's such a kind of abundance of berries and insect life and butterflies and things up at the top, why would they come down here? And the reason is you get these, I don't know if you can really make them out there, but if you look at the red and the green actually going over the log in the middle of the picture, every one of those is carried by an ant. So you get the leaf cutter ants carrying these leaves and petals back and forth in long kind of army chains. And then you get the army ants. So you get several million army ants. And quite often walking along Pipeline Road, you'll get huge hordes, several meters wide and meters long of army ants and leafcutter ants just working their way through the forest. And this attracts a species that you can only find right down on the forest floor, so which you won't find up at canopy or emergent level, which are these birds, or a variety of these birds, the ant birds. The ant shrikes are probably the most vibrant, the most colourful of the birds. Of course, you're competing with very low light here, so sometimes it's a record shot, sometimes you'll get a nice clean shot of these birds. But a lot of the species are very skulking, very fleeting glimpses, and you're really contending with very low light here. And to get photos at all is a kind of short of a miracle, because you often get very fleeting views of these different birds. But you get the wood wrens, you get the ant birds, the ant thrushes, the ant shrikes, the leaf tossers, all these different basically ant birds which specialize in feeding on the army ants. The bicolored ant bird here, a couple of rings. Of course, photographing here is incredibly difficult. You're pushing the camera right to the limits to get anything kind of record wide. Any kind of light touching the forest floor is a kind of saving grace for getting shots of these birds. And they're all taking interest in the huge swarms of army ants. So if you see a swarm of army ants, just sit out for 20 minutes, half an hour, and sure enough, you'll see these various ant feeding specialists coming out. And every layer has its holy grail species. So you've got the trogons and the motmots. You've got the toucans, which are the iconic ones. Down here, the iconic forest floor bird species would probably be, well, there's two which are coming up here. So the ocellated antbird is only found in this particular tract of forest in Panama, and it's got this kind of really interesting bare blue kind of vulture-like skin on its face. And here you'll see the ocellated antbird and the wood creepers watching these swarms of army ants trying to feed on them. But behavior-wise, quite an interesting thing to see. Literally millions of ants, trying to not get bitten by them, while trying to get good views of all these different birds all gathering for the same purpose. And these are very, very rare. So to see these at all and actually see quite big little parties, quite big parties of antbirds and ocellated antbirds is quite a thing. Photographically, of course, hard to capture that kind of behavior. You can see some ants in the leaves, but video is kind of the simplest method of capturing this behavior. And various very, very shy canopy species come down here, and actually that you're struggling to see at the other levels come out and show very, very well in these circumstances. So your tillers here, the spade bills are kind of very small kind of flycatcher species. And even one of the kind of rarer forest dwellers, so this only found in a couple of places near Panama City, the rosy thrush tanager. Again, usually you only hear it, you very rarely see it, but actually to get it, also taking an interest in the ants. But what everyone kind of hopes to see around the ant swarms are these ground cuckoos. This is a rufous vented ground cuckoo, so someone just took a flash photo there, and you get pheasant cuckoos as well. But you see just how many huge, huge swarms of ants here. And of course, if you're staring at the leaves long enough, getting your eye into all the different ants and all the different birds there, you have to really find things like the nighthawks and all these parrots, so kind of species of tropical nightjar. And then as night kicks in, you get nighthawks on migration, flying from the rooftop past the Panama City in the very distance. And you kind of, the rainforest really comes alive at night, so obviously you can't see as much, but you hear the kind of haunting calls of the night monkeys and the various different treetop anteaters, frogs, cacophonies of frogs everywhere, and it's at the emergent layer and canopy layers that you hear this cacophony, this richness, this kind of full-bodied orchestra sound. And looking out from the canopy tower at night time with a torch, it's a little bit, for me as a photographer, after a week there, you feel a bit like a kid under the bed covers, reading a book full of different stories. And of course, from up there, you get this very holistic overview of the different stories of the rainforest. And I think this is a wonderful place to stay, just because you get, the full picture, the 4 stories of the rainforest, and it's a real kind of fires the imagination for bird watchers, mammal watchers, wildlife photographers. So you know what, I think I can round off there on that. It's a truly magical place, as you can see. Yeah, so I can take any questions.
That was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Yes, indeed. Any questions? Studying photography.
So on that trip, I had a camera trap for the just a standard like Bushnell camera trap, so remote triggered thing for all those videos. And then I had a Canon R7, so a mirrorless camera, so pretty good at the low light stuff. And then I had a couple of fixed prime lenses, so like a 100mm, so all kind of quite low light lenses, but even anything below the canopy is a bit of a struggle. So yeah, I use prime, but yeah, but I think if I'm struggling with light, then I try to make that an advantage. So obviously there are the odd record shots, but I try to work the difficult situations to my advantage, and either I just completely abandon it, or I think, actually, you know what, I'm going to frame the bird among nice dappled leaves, and have it smaller in the frame, or maybe do a silhouette or backlit shot. I don't get frustrated with the sometimes the limitations of the part of the forest. Why I love starting very high up, because you get that kind of sweeping overview, and then work your way down, and you can kind of test out kind of the frustrating ideas, or the ideas that will frustrate you low down. You can test that out in a kind of easy, safe place. and then kind of put them to the proper test, and we kind of go down into the forest. With in what sense? Like,
I've heard.
yeah, I mean, I've had no issues with mine. I mean, I think some people have issues with focusing because you get kind of eye tracking technology, which actually was really useful for some of the ant birds, because then the camera kind of identifies the bird's eye, locks onto it, and then as it moves in and out of the foliage, actually it keeps finding the focus again. Whereas previously on other cameras, I've had to kind of keep auto-focusing, keep manually, and then obviously by the time I've done that, the birds moved on. So it has simplified things massively with some of those.
I just realised I forgot to say that because we're on Zoom as well, if you could repeat the question,
oh,
because
yeah,
they won't have heard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, you're good bird. So, growing up, how did your interest develop?
Yeah, so I will give a very potted rundown. But I think how I started was it photography or nature, and obviously my understanding of nature. If there's access to the online talks from earlier this year, I did a talk on various European wildlife photography hotspots where I go into more detail on how I actually got into it. Yeah, the wildlife interest came first, and I was always interested, like kind of picking caterpillars up in the garden, that kind of thing. And then a family holiday to Florida, where there's alligators and herons everywhere, and herons are one of my favorite birds. So that kind of prompted it, and I loved looking at them from, using kind of a little camcorder or kind of wind up disposable camera, or painting pictures of them or writing about them and having a travel journal. So I loved embracing them in different ways, but then photography kind of ended up clicking. And I did started going to my local nature reserve with my dad, who was also kind of into birds and a little bit of photography, and he kind of showed me the ropes with film photography with a very approachable heron, and then kind of worked my time with that. Kind of fell in love with the kind of teasing with different photographic moments with this very obliging bird. But you can kind of hear more about that in the other talk. But yeah, the understanding of the animals came much before, and just wanting to kind of capture the essence of them, or the essence of how I wanted to see them in a photo.
I find when you go birding, a lot of people are the same thing. Very often they don't really know. Obviously.
Well, I think, so not pointing the camera randomly, but shooting with intention. So I like knowing what I'm photographing, and I guess one aspect is I don't really mind what the animal is, but if the light is interesting or if the behavior is interesting, then you can make a fantastic shot out of a snail or a terrible shot out of a tiger. But if there's something not clicking, then it's going to be terrible. And something wonderful, like Wildlife Photography of the Year exhibition at the British Museum at the moment, the winning shot was from tadpoles, and the junior entry was of a tiny little springtail about that big on a mushroom, sizing up its meal, and it wasn't a lion or whatever. So the light, the behavior, the approach is more interesting to me. But then, I think the thing about why I really like the Canopy Tower is that you've got, as I keep saying, those 4 different stories, rather than just experiencing one story of the rainforest, as a lot of people do, just on the bottom. You've got all 4, and you actually understand each species' place within that ecosystem. And then obviously they don't just stick to that place. They move down a layer, maybe to nest, or they move up a layer to feed, or they drop down to get the army ants. So understanding that just also gives them more interesting observations, and knowing that there's army ants, then you stumble upon all these the pheasant cuckoo and so on, or knowing that a bird sings every morning at 7 a.m. you know where to get the light. And
see, ironically, I found that despite those beautiful my favorite picture was
Debbie.
A practical question. You just mentioned again these 4 levels.
Yeah.
In the forms, I can see how you access the ground level. I can see how you access the top level, looking down from the canopy. I'm not too clear about the middle 2. Are there sort of areas of the tower itself with viewing platforms?
Okay, so that question, how do you access the other levels, not just the ground level of the forest and not just the top level, but everything in between? So partly from the tower, there's 3 stories. Sorry, 3 levels of the tower. So from which you have the roof looking over the entire forest, so the emergent layer, 200 feet up, roughly. And then you can go down to lower levels where you're looking through the trees. And then, of course, you've got the garden ground level. In terms of the second section, which was the canopy level, that's more you're experiencing it either looking through the treetops, as you saw in some of the toucan shots at the very beginning, where you're getting them among the leaves, or else you're looking at that from more often than not from ground level, peering up. But then you're craning your neck and you're sweating, and you get glary things. So you get some species like the trogons and the motmots, which come down a little bit lower. And then the kind of mid-story is kind of anywhere 10 to 50 feet or so. And that's, where you get the mannequins. So again, you're looking from ground level, but you're kind of, peering up. So even if I'm looking at that kind of ventilation thing, if you get the right lens or the right perspective, then it almost feels eye level.
So the top level is the unique bit. The mid levels are still pretty tough.
Unique for photography or experience. Yeah, so the top level, the emergent layer, is probably the most unique experience, I think. Because obviously it's the only building in the entire forest, so it's the only place you're going to see things like that, blue tinga, or get such good views of the birds migrating and things, and such clear, open views, unobstructed. But yeah, every layer has its different, unique points.
Elaine, you wanted to ask a question?
Well, I've got 2 questions on Zoom, and I'm not sure whether the first one has been answered, but it was how easy, difficult is it to reach the top of the tower?
So to reach the top of the tower, it's 3 flights of stairs. So obviously you don't have to do it all in one go. As in, you can go by. There's 2 levels which are basically bedrooms, and there's a kind of kitchen level sitting room, and actually you can observe a lot just from there. So like the Panama night monkey that you saw at the very end was observed from the kitchen window, or restaurant window. The roof, then there's a kind of not vertical, it's just a kind of staircase ladder, and then there's a hatch that you go up. But I mean, there's also people going there, and people manage totally fine. So it's not a strenuous thing. Obviously, if you do it in one go and then realize you've left something in your bedroom and go downstairs, I've been out of breath, but that's going up and down and up again. But that's fine.
And the other one is, are the many dead trees a seasonal thing, or is it just natural regeneration?
Just the dead trees at the
presumably in the photos.
Where at the top or the there was a shot at the beginning of various trees that looked dead. I think they weren't in their prime in terms of bloom. So later on in the season, those trees that looked dead, they're suddenly going to bloom yellow. I forget what species of tree are. But anyway, they all bloom yellow. No, they're not dead. They're just not flowering. So about a month later, there'll be an amazing yellow flower.
Have you any more questions from the room? Well, I've got one, because this is somewhere I really want to visit. I've been wanting to visit for a long time. Is there any particular time of the year that is good, or any particular time of the year that is not so good?
I would say,
what would you recommend?
I would say time of year to visit. Every time of year is good, as in there's always different animals. So it's a location which unusually is great, even in like August, which is pretty terrible for most places. But I think, you get a lot of Americans, like people from Florida. It's only an hour and a half from Miami to fly there, but they often go in December, January, when it's very, very nice and hot, like 35 degrees in Panama. a bit cooler, not that much cooler in Florida, but you get quite a lot of flowering plants kind of end of their dry season, so February, March. However, I think you get more intensity of experiences in the rainy season. Obviously, you get the rain, which gives life to everything. You get a lot of flowering plants in that overlap of seasons, so you get more hummingbirds, you get more frogs calling constantly around the clock, kind of nectaring bats and anteaters and things, more butterflies. Yeah, I just think it just feels a bit more alive, and you get mists and amazing sunsets and things.
I mean, you
I'll go for the rainy season.
you didn't need to sell it to me, but you just did.
But I would go for the start or end of the rainy season, and you get migrations as well in March, April, and September, October. Middle rainy season, kind of June, July, August, it's still fantastic. Like there's hundreds and hundreds of birds, but it's less varied.
Yeah.
And you're going to get much wetter days throughout, so less birding opportunities.
Thank you. One more.
Did you explore any other areas?
On my regular trips there, and on this particular trip, it was just the Soberania National Park and the Panama City. So it's a great park. There's a Metropolitan Forest Park in Panama City, which is a jungle on the doorstep. You get lots of people doing their morning jogs around there, but you get all sorts of amazing animals there. But the first time I ever went was obviously for that reality TV shoot in BOC, the archipelago. You get some similar species, so obviously toucans and tanagers, a few more endemic species, some of the Costa Rican species up there, but it's kind of characterized by mangroves and slightly less dense rainforest, like much water elevation. But yeah, that's fun to go to. That's quite a kind of a very colourful kind of Caribbean side. You get lots of lovely, colourful houses on stilts and mangroves and lots of mangrove species and tropic birds, frigate birds.
Another question from the floor.
It's kind of on the pipeline road. Yeah, so it's 5 minutes away. Yeah. So the tower is on Semaphore Hill, and then there's Pipeline Road, Canberra Road down there. But that's probably the best place for bird watching in probably the whole of America. And you can see upwards of 300 species if you're lucky in the day.
I know what I'm going to be doing when I get home tonight. Right, I'm going to, unless there's any other burning questions, I'm going to ask the questions now. It's time we had a break, and then there'll be a little bit more afterwards about the birding highlights. But I just want to say thank you so much. It was absolutely brilliant talk. I've enjoyed every minute. I hope the rest of you did. Not just the stunning photography, but the look at the different layers, and brilliant, absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much indeed.
Right.
Paul.
Thank you.